This guy leaned down to my son and he threatened me through my son. He said, you mess with my son, I'm going to stab your father. I was a time bomb in a lot of sense. I was fueled by rage and contempt. I was ready to throw everything out the window and just, go pure savage mode on this guy. Greetings and salutations. I'm Victor Sorti and welcome to my channel at 28 to Persevere. Thanks for watching. At the end of this video, hit me up with a comment, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. Check out some of my merch I have made available through my Instagram account. Just click on that account, check out what's available to support this channel. Appreciate all your time and your energy and the focus that you've given me throughout my time here doing these videos. It's been an endeavor of love and commitment from so many people that have expressed their support to me, and I to them. I'm wholeheartedly appreciative of the outpouring of support I've had throughout this time and this journey that we've had together. These videos encompass my life and my experiences throughout my 28 years of incarceration. They also encompass my perspective on my life now, what I learned, the lessons, as harsh as they were life lessons that have given me perspective on the broader scope of living and given me a broader appreciation, a depth of perception that I've truly come to understand that I've utilized, and how I can implement that a sense of appreciation every day above ground, which is a blessing. And I thank the gods every day that I stand and sit where I am at this stage of my life. With that understanding, I also know that throughout the trials and tribulations and the dark passages that I had to walk through and I had to confront each and every day of my life throughout my incarceration, those lessons linger in a way that is as if a scar that festers, really never healed or completely over. It's something I carry with me every day. It's a lesson learned, but it reminds me that I've survived, and that point of being a survivalist in that sense of confronting the unknown elements and surviving gives me confidence moving forward with everything that I do in my life, and every trial and every tribulation and every obstacle that I have to confront. It gives me a broader perspective on my life and what it means to me, and how I can associate it with making a better choices for me to be a better person, to do the right thing. Perspective. With that in mind, keeping that perspective and upholding the standards and the discipline and the principles. And throughout my incarceration, those standards and those principles, you had to weigh your options each and every day. You had to sit back and reflect, and when you had the time to actually get into yourself introspectively to understand what you had to do that day, a lot of times those personal preferences that you might have with your perspectives, with your principles and your objectives, and how what you value in your life, you have to not only weigh them, but at times you have to test them, and you'll be forced to test them. Anyone who's ever done any type of incarceration, anybody that's ever done any type of time, no matter what joint you were in, if you were upstate in the prison system or you were downstate in some county jail, I mean, whatever the case may be, you're going to confront these types of choices and these values that you have, the things you were learned that as a child, a lot of which no longer can be implicated in the sense that what you are really valuing, how you're utilizing your time and energy, and how you're going to survive now. You're implicated in doing the things that you need to do now, that are going to make you understand that these choices are going to be tested. And with that being said, I remember a lot of times, I was put in situations where it literally was a life or death situation. I had to make a split-second decision, and I had to make a choice, especially in communicating with someone that I knew would be strapped, that I knew at any moment could brandish a weapon and try to, literally take me out. And I knew that, and I also was strapped many times in certain times and certain confrontations that I knew that would transpire. And I had to make split-second decisions. And there were times where I was put in predicaments where you have to have a sit-down with somebody, or I have to be basically the mediator between certain people that were having issues with another type of gang or whoever. And these split-second decisions, the principles and values that I had really came in handy, because I understand that in life, discipline is essential. It's essential as the air you breathe to a large extent, in whatever you do. And having the confidence to do the things you need to do really can work wonders for you as far as overcoming whatever obstacle, man-made or otherwise, is in front of you. Having that confidence that you uphold your principles and you uphold your integrity, and no matter where you stand and sit, and having that confidence to talk to someone that is maybe completely foreign to your sensibilities in every sense of the word, but you understand one another and you start to learn from one another. I remember a time, a moment, an experience that really defined who I was and moving forward, and really tested my principles. And this particular experience happened in the visiting room. I was with my family, doing what we've done hundreds, if not thousands of times, having a visit. It was my wife and my children at the time, who were very small, very young. And this particular person confronted my son, who was playing with his son in a little play area. And he literally said something to my son, threatening me, because his son was complaining that they were arguing or tussling over a toy. They were children. They were like 6 and 8, something along those lines. So this guy leaned down to my son and he threatened me through my son. He said he was basically, you mess with my son, I'm going to stab your father. This guy literally said that to my kid, who I think was 6 at the time. And my boy obviously was devastated by it. So he came back to the table crying. I didn't really understand what was going on. And he shared something about how, daddy's going to get hurt. Daddy's going to get hurt. And so my wife at the time, she knew what was going on at that moment. And she was like, what is this about? So I, of course, immediately went on point. At that point in my life, I was in my early 20s. I was a time bomb in a lot of sense of the word. As far as my anger was concerned, I was fueled by rage and contempt, and an anger that really sustained me a lot of times, a rage that kept me channeled into the environment, focused, and totally on point. Because you have to walk the razor's edge in prison, you better be on point in what you're up against and be conscientious of your environment and aware of everybody around you. So I immediately was on point, and so I asked him, I asked my son politely, who's the man? So he pointed out to me, and there was this guy who was affiliated, he was a gangbanger, and I looked over at him, and I just kept my cool. I didn't say nothing. I just kept on the cap, and of course my wife had pleaded me not to do anything, and this, that, the third. But, the guy violated, man, and there was, to me, in my mind, I'll do whatever I have to do, whether or not my life is in jeopardy, to uphold the integrity and the safety and sanity and sanctity of my family. They come first. They come before my own well-being in that sense. I'll sacrifice myself for the betterment of my own. And I was willing to do whatever I needed to do. So I was going to confront that guy, and I immediately got up on the visiting floor. At that point, I was just fueled with anger, and I ran up to the dude who was sitting with his family, and I walked up to him and I tapped him on the shoulder and I said, "Yo, I'm Vic. You got something to say to me? You got something to share with me?" So he stood up, and we got nose to nose. And the visiting room, at this point, the police ran down the thing. I mean, it was everybody tension. The tension was really tight, and we were just staring at each other. He said, "See, I'll see you in the hour." So I said, "Yeah, see me in the hour. See me now. Whatever the case may be." And I was about to explode, and obviously my wife was grabbing me. His wife was grabbing him. The police grabbed us. They brought us in the other rooms. They were trying to find out what's going, and I wasn't going to say anything. I was like, it was nothing, no big deal. It was nothing, water under the bridge, no harm, no foul. And they weren't hearing that, of course. And so they were trying to pry information from me, which they weren't going to get. And he held it down. He didn't say anything because we both were channeled into meeting each other in the yard, and we were going to, handle our business, whatever it was. I mean, fist to cuff or gun to gun. I mean, we were willing to do whatever we had to do at that point, and that was my mindset. So, I kissed my wife and kid, told him to leave early because he left early because I wanted to meet him in the yard. And he looked back. I mean, I was staring daggers at him because in my mind, it was on, whatever the case may be. And at this point, I would throw down quickly if I had to at that stage of my life. And as I stated previously, I never thought I was going to get out of prison in my early goings there in my 20s. So I carried myself in such a fashion, that somebody took me out or I had to take somebody out, so be it. I was very indifferent, and the sanctity of life was on the razor's edge of losing that precious commodity that we have inside us. And so, I immediately kissed my wife and we left the visiting floor, and I met this guy in the yard. And at this time, it was like 20 below zero. It was freezing out, and I remember walking out. All I had was a shirt on, the shirts that you were allowed to wear on the visiting floor. It was button shirts and Henleys, I think they were called. And I remember going outside, and And I immediately started going towards him. He was all bundled up, and I know he was strapped. I could tell from the jacket. He had something in his jacket. And I wasn't. I just, I walked out literally with my shirt. But there was a lot of guys that saw this. And at this point in my incarceration, a lot of guys had a lot of respect for me as I did them. So there was various people that knew what was going on. So there was people that literally posted. I didn't know any of this when I got out, but there was men posted throughout the yards, seeing what was going on. And somebody I knew came up to me real quickly and tried to pass me a shank. And I said, "No, I'm good." I didn't grab it. And I was so angry. I was just going to handle it with my bare hands and do whatever I had to do. I believe in the old Viking ethos of the berserker. The berserker is something that is the essence that is within you. They passed down by your ancestors that you and I and all of us, I believe, have that essence that you can channel to protect your own. It's a survival, the fight or flight mechanism. Well, I believe it's full-fledged fight when it comes to the berserker mode, and I was willing to channel it at any moment if I had to. And I walked out of there, and I walked right up to the guy, and he came up to me, and initially, he didn't hook off. I just walked up to him, and he wanted to say, "Let's spin." That's what he said to me, "Let's spin." So we're spinning the yard, talking, and I'm obviously watching his hands. His hands were, he had gloves on or whatever. He was fully, geared up as far as the winter was concerned. I wasn't, and I was just walking around with him. And there's people watching me, which, as I stated previously, I didn't even know. And obviously, he had his boys on point, whatever. And we spun the yard, and he apologized. I mean, it blew my mind really, because at that stage, I remember the values that I had and how much my family were valuable to me, and I obviously let the guy have it verbally, let him know, what he violated, and to his credit, I mean, the guy literally spun the yard with me, and he saw the way I confronted him, and he literally asked me if I was insane because he's affiliated with this, that, and the third, and he kept saying who he's affiliated with. I was like, honestly, man, I really don't give a damn, and I know I said something probably a lot more than that, but I didn't give a shit, whatever, man. I mean, whatever. I'm Vic, and I'm who I am, and this is my life, and I got to live it, and if you're in the way of it, you and I can just, we can kill each other right now, or whatever the case may be. I mean, we can handle this like gentlemen or kill each other, but you violated. You violated. You're saying something to my son. You say nothing to my family. You say it to me. And, we were going back and forth as far as the verbal, and we were just communicating, but it really wasn't negative, if that makes any sense. It was, it was something that you had that open line of communication. And he eventually, he apologized to me. The guy actually stuck his hand out, took his glove off so I could see his hand, and it was bare. And so I grasped his hand, and he said he's going to apologize to my family and all that, and then he's kind of spun off, and I kept an eye on him, and then a bunch of guys I know came out of basically the shadows of the woodworks to find out if everything was good and what was up with me, and him and I, and then word of mouth, they found out who he was and everything. I mean, he literally said who he was anyway, his name, and then make a long story short, the gang that he was affiliated with, one of the shot callers of that gang, I was really, really close to, a dude that was a few years older than me, but he ran the show basically in that sect, and he caught wind of what happened, and he immediately addressed it with the guy prior to me coming out, and he had a lot of respect for me. So this type of reality was something that I had to deal with right off the bat, and I knew that whatever it was that I had to confront at that particular time, I was going to confront it regardless of the situation. That's just the way it was going to be. So the shot caller uh, came to see me later on in the yard. And mind you, we were in the yard for like 3 or 4 hours, and all I had was a shirt, and I remember it was like 30 below, whatever it was, 20 below. It was freezing out, and he came and he pulled me over and wanted to spin the yard with me and giggle with me about what just took place, and he obviously apologized, and he just said, "Listen, Vic, that's not the deal. That was the sanction, and we'll handle that in house basically," and which I told they did. And a lot of guys that I knew were ready to pop off in a second. They were like, "Okay, well, listen, but they violated. Let's do it." There's some guys that brothers of mine that they would risk their lives all the time for me if they had to. I mean, they would die in battle as I would for them. And we had that oath. We had that will to persevere within us, and we looked out for each other in the foxhole. We lived each and every day. But I eventually saw the guy on the visit a couple days later, and he did apologize to my family. He actually apologized to my wife, and his wife did also. And his wife and my wife actually became somewhat close. And later on, my incarceration, because he was a regular on the visiting floor, him and I got pretty close as far as it became a mutual respect in a sense. And when he saw me coming to visit, he would always give me a little nod or whatnot, or see me in the yard to give me a shout out. But it's just the fine line you walk in prison, a razor's edge. and how close it can come to something drastically traumatic and deadly at a drop of a hat. So you know this, and I talk a lot about the values and the principles, the noble virtues that I try to uphold every day of my life. And at that time, it was tested because I was ready to throw everything out the window and just go pure savage mode of this guy, channel my berserker rage. And I knew at that time in my life that I didn't have a firm grasp on it. There was the void that I was looking into each and every day, and I was starting to embrace the darkness in a lot of sense. Where my wife kept me grounded in a positive reality, but she was a shining light of inspiration, as were my children and still are. And it just allowed me to process my values and uphold my principles in a fashion that would allow me to still be an upstanding man for them and to still do the things that I needed to do. But they understood. My wife understood, and like she said, if you had to handle your business, I got your back. She 100% always had my back. It still does. And she knew that if this guy violated it, he was a threat in some form or fashion, I had to protect myself and protect my life and protect my family, which any man should without a doubt do. I mean, regardless of the ramifications of doing so, whether your life is lost in the process or not. There's an honorable death, and then there's a straw death. You die just alone in bed, regretful of everything in your life. And then there's a death where you uphold those principles and that integrity in your family and your lifeblood. And there's a legacy and a legend behind that. That's something that will be remembered forever. As sagas are written about men like that, people like that in general. So it's like something that I truly, really remember vividly at a time in my life when I walked that razor's edge. And those principles, having the honor and respect of the people around you, was integral to every day. Even though you look at the bigger, grander scheme of things, and you think to yourself how people view prisoners, and it's understandable. Everything's the scum of the earth and whatnot, and to a large extent they are. But there's also men of integrity incarcerated in the prison system that uphold these values every day, and they live by a discipline. And not only being regimented with the routines and the daily life and the daily grind, but upholding their own principles and values, trying to hold on to their sense of identity and their integrity in a world that strips you of all of that. You're trying to hold on to your base instincts, your humanity, something that is also tested in more ways than one. You can become a pure savage and be indifferent to the value of human life whatsoever. It's very easily you can do that in the prison system. From my experiences, I've seen it, and my value system was constantly tested. So now I look back on it, and I carry myself in such a fashion, and where I try to, when I meet people that are new and don't know my past or whatever, there's nothing for me to process as far as being tested in that sense, because I understand everything I went through. Those types of tests prepared me for the life beyond the wall, where things aren't as harsh as they could be. Obviously, I mean that goes without saying. But overall, it isn't on a daily day. I mean, your daily day doesn't consist of you worrying about whether or not you're going to get gunned down or whatnot. And perhaps at times it is. You feel that way because of how the fear mongering is outside the wall here, the mainstream media and whatnot. But inside the walls, there was no fear mongering because it was reality. You had to be on point. You had to be on your P's and Q's. You had to know what the next man was thinking and how things can escalate so quickly. And you had to uphold not only your own values, but your sense of vigilance. You had to be hyper vigilant. The price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And the freedoms that you had in prison, the small little freedoms. It could be just coming out of your cell and going out to the yard to hit the iron or walk the yard or kick it or play chess. I mean, there's guys that, every day they would go out, they play chess for hours in the yard, rain, sleet, or shine. They didn't care. 20, 30 below, 6 feet of snow. They were there playing chess. Old timers too. I mean, I remember a lot of Spanish brothers that I was real cool to. They had their chess partners. I mean, that's what they would do every day. They did it for hours on end. These guys were brilliant at it for all intents and purposes. And so it's the little values, the price of freedom that you pay to be eternally vigilant inside the joint, really puts you in a perspective and a frame of mind where it's something unlike anything you could imagine, obviously beyond the wall. And you could process information differently and you can interpret it in your own fashion. But when you're behind the walls of the prison system, it's a world unto itself, which I spoke about numerous times in my videos. It's something I'm very aware of moving forward in my life. It's something that I always remember when I'm in any type of environment that maybe drama. There's a lot of drama or a lot of tension, and it could be for whatever reason, a work environment, or just around family, friends, or whatever, or strangers in a crowd. That base instinct never left me. Things that I process and how I process the information. Now I'm not as on point as I was. I don't think, as far as I can relax in crowds. I don't have to look around, you know, looking for the next whoever it is that's got that look in his eye. But I'm still aware of it, and then that survival instinct, I believe, is invaluable in a large extent in life. It doesn't have to be somebody that does prison time or is in a battle somewhere, in a war zone somewhere, military. It's something that you carry with you, and I'm really conscious of that and aware of it, of its importance moving forward. So hit me up with a comment. Let me know what y'all think, and just in general, not only about this video, but share some of your own experiences, something that made you confront your values and your principles and your integrity, and you had to process information quickly at a drop of a hat, and maybe disregard those values and those principles, and perhaps do something drastically, even because you felt your life was threatened, or something that you just felt that you couldn't really factor in anything that would even remotely consider you having any type of compassion or any type of virtue that you think that you carry with you every day. You try to uphold, but you had to disregard for survival purposes real quickly, and still hold on to your sense of humanity in the process, which is a fine balance. That's a balancing act for sure. But yeah, let me know, hit me up, and I appreciate all the support. As I said previously, until next time, go with the gods, persevere.